Okay, well, welcome everyone to this alternative access to, or alternative models to farmland access. It's a mouthful, but here we are. My name is Caitlin Leck. I'm going to help be a moderator today. And we have such an amazing panel of folks. So we'll get into the bios before each speaker shares, but just so you know who to keep an eye on here, we have Addie Candib, we have Peggy Bill, Patrick Bennett, Charlie Behnke, and Sandy Bishop. So thank you so much to our panelists, to our speakers, and thank you so much for being here, all y'all in the audience. So we are gonna do a quick little housekeeping. So welcome again. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors for the summit this year. So we have Orcas Food Co-op, San Juan County Land Bank, Natural Plant Solutions, San Juan Preservation Trust, Stonecrest Farm and Graziers, Girl Meets Dirt, T&D Farms, Jones Family Farms, Islanders Insurance, Watma Bay Farm, Midnight's Farm, San Juan Food System Housing Survey, Lopez Island Brewing Company, the Shepherd Family, San Juan Makers Guild, the Lopez Locavores, and a special thanks to all the anonymous donors. And also a big thank you to our partners, San Juan Islands Conservation District, Agricultural Resource Committee of San Juan County, Lopez Community Land Trust, San Juan Islands Agricultural Guild, San Juan County, Lopez Island School District, WSU Extension, San Juan County. Okay, and we're probably all pretty familiar at this point with Zoom, but just a couple of reminders. Please keep yourself muted. We are going to invite questions in the chat, and I'll help kind of track those. So as you listen to the speakers and a question pops into your mind, please put that in the chat. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end, and we'll see kind of if there are themes that emerge and ways that we can facilitate the panelists sharing with each other and answering questions with the audience. So questions in the chat. Feel free to rename yourself with your name, preferred pronouns, where you're calling in from. And yeah, we give a little wave. Anybody who wants to be on video, that's great. We have the panelists highlighted here. And then, yeah, just a reminder, the chat is public, so everyone can see what you write. So general agreements of respect and accountability here. Okay, so that's our housekeeping. And next up, we are going to have some evaluations for you all to fill out. So you're probably going to hear that a bunch of times. It is super helpful to have that information. So thanks ahead of time for filling out those evaluations. And then last little housekeeping item before we jump in, the panelists were curious who is here today. So Kristen, are you able to launch that poll? So here's a question. What is your role in the food system? And so you can answer what fits best, and that will give our panelists a sense of who is here, and that might kind of emphasize certain elements of their presentations. Okay. We're up to 75% people, 82. All right, so I'm seeing the most is an employer volunteer for a food and farm related organization and an owner operator of a farm business. We have some home gardeners, some full-time commercial farmers, and some part-time farmers. Okay, excellent. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. Thank you, Kristen. Let's see if we share these results. Are you all able to see that? Cool. Okay, great. So that's us today. All right, and one more. Okay. So yeah, let us dive in here into this conversation about alternative models for farmland access. So our first speaker is Addie Candib. And so Addie is the Pacific Northwest Regional Director for American Farmland Trust and a board member for the Puget Sound Agrarian Commons. Addie began her career in farmland protections at the Community Farmland Trust in Olympia, Washington. And she has been passionate about farmland access and affordability ever since. Addie lives with her family in Bellingham, Washington. And we are so grateful that you can be here with us. Thank you, Addie.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Okay, is my screen looking good? Excellent. I think we all know why we're here, so I'm going to dive in. The one caveat I'm going to offer is that the content I've prepared for today is a slice of a much larger presentation. So I am going to move quickly and talk fast, and I will just say at the outset that there's a lot more to say about all of the topics I'm going to touch on, and I really welcome further conversation after the fact. As Caitlin mentioned, this is something that's a deep passion of mine. So just to get us started, why are we all here today talking about creative models, and what's the end goal for this conversation? So in my eyes, we're talking about creative land access for a couple key reasons. One, most US land, farmland, is still owned by older white farmers and ranchers. There's this widening affordability gap between the cost of land and the ability of farmers to afford to farm that land. I pulled, with help from the team at the Ag Summit, some statistics around affordability. The Ag Census from 2017 shows that 75% of farms in San Juan County make less than $10,000 per year. I know that there's some undercounting there, but nonetheless, when you contrast that with the median home price in San Juan County up around $900,000, that's a pretty significant gap. We also know that land is increasingly scarce. According to AFT's Farms Under Threat research, San Juan County lost about 3.75% of its ag land to development between 2001 and 2016. And we know that the pace of that conversion has anecdotally accelerated in the last 5 or 6 years. There's also shifting values around how people want to farm, and whether sort of folks questioning whether ownership is the way that they want to be on land. On the other side of it, what's the end goal? The end goal for me is helping farmers get to stable, secure, affordable land tenure, helping those farmers get to sustainable land stewardship, and collectively building stronger local food systems and food sovereignty. I think it's really important to ground us in the fact that creative land access isn't new. We have to acknowledge that the land we live on and farm was for millennia stewarded by Indigenous peoples whose management practices intentionally balanced the need for food with the health of the landscape. And so our conversation about pathways to land tenure have to recognize that the original human landscape or relationship to this landscape didn't involve ownership. And then secondly, many of the specific strategies that I'm going to talk about today have their roots in queer communities and communities of color. There's a long history of people who have been denied access to resources and excluded from institutions, being resourceful and creative around building systems of mutual support and safety. The image on the left here is an image from the New Communities community land trust in Albany, Georgia is one of the first community land trusts founded by Black folks during the civil rights era. And at its height, it encompassed about several thousand acres of ag land. And the image on the right, so someone who might be familiar to some of you, Sandor Katz is one of many gay men who in particular have found sanctuary on agricultural communes in rural Tennessee and other parts of Appalachia. So again, lifting this up to say, we're not inventing the wheel here. There's a long history that we need to and can look out for inspiration. A couple more caveats here. Again, these creative land access strategies, I've noticed, and some of you may have noticed, that when we tend to talk about creative land access strategies, there's like a sexiness or a coolness to it. Everyone wants to be talking about creative land access. I think we need to be talking about it because it's necessary for all of the reasons that we talked about. It's really essential, and it's really essential, especially when we start trying to think about building systems change. Creative, just because a land access strategy is creative or alternative, doesn't mean it's secure, stable, or non-extractive. And I have this quote here from a farmer that we interviewed as part of some research we did, saying, it's not about becoming creative about land access, it's about having the resources to secure it. So I include that to make the point that creativity isn't necessarily the end goal. The end goal, again, is systems change and that stable, secure land tenure, and we got to keep our eyes on that prize. Another way to think about it is that some of these strategies are really just band-aids for a capitalist system that was designed to exclude people. Okay, I promise I'm going to get to the meat here soon, but these are important ways to frame this. I want to get really specific what I mean when I'm talking about land tenure. So when you say access could mean the tools that you're using to find land, like a farm linking program. For the purposes of today, I'm thinking about ways that land is held. Access to land versus access to capital. Most alternative tenure models, as we're going to talk about, fall into some version of purchasing and leasing. So what makes it alternative is that it's not necessarily happening on the open market at market prices. Alternative capital to capital access could mean that you find a creative way to raise funds to get land. Like you could use a crowdfunding tool, but ultimately you hold that land in a very traditional way. So that's why I parse out those two. It can be very easy to conflate them. And then lastly, it can be very tricky to tease apart land tenure from business model. There are more and more examples where farmers own land in a conventional way, but they make that feasible because they're leveraging a more collective business model and pooling assets as part of a cooperative business. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to focus on the land tenure piece. So when we talk about creative land access strategies, what makes it creative? Most creative models, as I said, still involve some form of leasing or purchasing. Not all of them, there's some exceptions. So what changes in a lease or purchase model to make it creative? I identified three, and I call these creativity levers. Three main levers. The first is who leases or sells the land. The second is, who leases out or sells it. The second is who leases or purchases the land. And then the third is the terms of the sale or the lease. So this little table on the right here, you've got our levers. In a conventional model, you might have a sole proprietor who owns the land, leases it out to a farmer who has an LLC as their business model, and they have a 5-year lease on that land. If you take a more creative model, you could have a city that owns the land and they lease it to a nonprofit. And then the nonprofit subleases it to a new farmer. And that sublease is a 5-year sublease. But in addition to the land, it includes housing and shared infrastructure and access to technical assistance. So though that just sort of illustrates what I mean by those three creativity levers. Caitlin, since I can see your face, will you give me a 5-minute warning? Awesome, thanks. It's going to be hard for me to track that time. So I'm going to talk very quickly about 10 different strategies. My goal here is not to provide an exhausting index of all of the entities in Washington that are offering some type of creative land access. There are others that you're not going to see show up in my examples, and they're not left out on purpose. I just was trying to lift up some examples to illustrate the ideas I'm going to talk about. The first is land trusts, using an easement model. And this may be familiar to many of you. What makes this model creative? In this model, a land trust typically uses public funding to remove development rights from a piece of land. What makes this creative is that it reduces purchase price and increase affordability for the next farmer, and the land is protected in perpetuity. Some considerations is that there's often a long time frame, especially where public funding is involved. The land can still be quite expensive with an easement, so it's not a panacea to get us to affordability. Land trust priorities might not match farmer priorities. So there may be a gap in what the land trust wants to work on and where or what the farmer wants to farm. And then lastly, farmer demand exceeds the available funding and land trust capacity at present. We've got a bunch of great examples of organizations working on this in our region. Washington Farmland Trust in the room today, nice to see you. Jefferson Land Trust, Whatcom Land Trust, the Black Oregon Land Trust down in Oregon, and many, many others. Next are land trusts using the ground lease model, and we're going to hear from Lopez Community Land Trust later about what they do. But what makes it creative is that there are affordable long-term leases. In this model, the land trust owns the land and they lease it out. There's the ability for the farmer to build equity through infrastructure ownership, but the land is also protected in perpetuity. Again, though, long time frames to implement long-term leases can be intimidating for new farmers who are just starting out. Again, land trust priorities might not match farmer priorities. It's not as widely implemented in the Pacific Northwest as I think it is in the Northeast part of the United States. And again, we bump into farmer demand exceeding available funding and land trust capacity. Examples, in addition to the Lopez Community Land Trust, are the Community Farmland Trust down in Olympia and the Puget Sound Agrarian Commons. I sit on their board and we steward a 12-acre parcel on Whidbey Island that we will be leasing out very soon to a group called Modest Family Solutions, which is a Black Muslim-led organization that works on food sovereignty. Very exciting project. Next, we have incubator farms. These are going to be familiar to a lot of you. Again, in these models, typically a nonprofit, but sometimes a public entity like a conservation district owns a piece of land and they lease it out, typically lease small parcels to new farmers. There's often shared equipment, infrastructure, and marketing, sometimes technical assistance, peer-to-peer networking. These can be a really great tool to get new farmers on land to get their businesses started, but they're typically short-term leases, no ability to build equity, and can be really difficult for small businesses to transition out of the incubator into other more long-term land tenure arrangements. We've got some fantastic incubator programs in the region: Viva Farms, Cloud Mountain Farm Center, Headwaters Farm down in Oregon, and the Raíces Cooperative in the Gorge. Municipal leasing. So again, we're going to hear later from the San Juan County Land Bank. But municipal leasing, in my mind, is when municipalities are looking at managing the lands they own for broader community food systems benefit. This is not new per se. There's a long tradition of public lands being leased, especially for ranching operations. Millions of acres in the West are being leased to ranchers by federal agencies like Bureau of Land Management and state agencies like Department of Natural Resources. What's newer here, I think, is cities and counties that are looking at leasing land for smaller scale sustainable ag. And in some communities in particular, really looking at addressing equity concerns through that. Some considerations are that land available, again, may not match farmer priorities. I think there can be a lack of transparency or strong outreach about land availability. Do farmers know where to turn or who to talk to if they want to figure out how to access land from a city or county? I think there's room to grow there. Partnership with local government or any government entity may not feel safe or like a good values fit for some farmers. And there may also be increased compliance requirements, depending on what the city requires or the municipality requires. King County has a great farm lease program, and the other one I wanted to lift up was Bainbridge Island and their partnership with Friends of the Farms, facilitating land access. Parochial leasing. What I mean when I talk about parochial leasing is folks leasing land from churches in particular. I have an asterisk here because I think there are other creative examples in this model where someone leases land from a school district or leases land from some other institution. Churches are the one that I hear about the most. I think it's creative because folks are using land for food production that otherwise wouldn't be farmed. But these opportunities may not be publicized. They really might require the instigation of the farmer. I've heard of farmers literally knocking on church doors and asking to use their lawn. But there can be constraints on when and how that land is used. I heard a story of a farmer in Boise, Idaho, who is leasing land from a church, but he is not allowed to farm on Saturdays and Sundays. So, that could be a major barrier. And then lastly here, partnerships with faith-based institutions may not feel safe for like a values fit. And the example I offer here is World Relief Seattle, where they lease land at Hillside Church for a community garden project. Cooperatives and collectives. I struggled with this slide and whether to tease these apart. In the end, I kept them together partially because the word collective is really squishy and a lot of folks have different definitions of what it means. So it was really hard to hone in on what a collective farm is. In essence, I think what makes these models similar is that there's shared ownership of a business and or land. Like if it's a cooperative, it can be worker owned, and that decisions are often governed by consensus. Some considerations are that these tend to be legally and financially more complex. Again, those definitions are squishy, and that they're not well understood by lenders and technical service providers. Some examples here. Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad is a Latinx-owned farm worker cooperative here in Whatcom County. I believe they currently lease their land where they grow some blueberries and other crops. Wintergreen Farm is a multi-owner LLC down in Oregon. So another example of a sort of shared ownership, but not a co-op. And then Shared Soil Farm in King County, they call themselves a collective. They're owned by one couple that then subleases to some other businesses, and they share resources. So really different ways to sort of parse this model. Okay, I'm gonna move really fast through these last couple of slides. Agri-villages. What's unique about this is that farming takes place within the broader community context. There's an opportunity for on-site housing. Land stewardship is sort of connected to broader community values. We have Rooted Northwest, which is a pretty new eco-village or agri-village down in Snohomish County, and then Yarrow Eco-Village up in Chilliwack have had farming on their property for a long time. These are pretty uncommon in the PNW, and I think you run into the challenges that you run into anytime you're trying to do something in community, that the priorities of the farm may not be the priorities of the rest of the community. There's a lack of control over who comes and goes from the land. Non-familial succession. I think this is one where we could spend an entire session talking about it, but within this model, over time, knowledge and experience are transferred from one generation to the next, alongside the land and infrastructure. Lots of different permutations here. It's going to be highly dependent on the personal chemistry and mutual commitment to the process. And I think these require a lot of deep support and technical expertise that as sort of an ag service provider community, we're still trying to build up. And there are a couple of great examples. Both of these were profiled by Rogue Farm Corps' Changing Hands series, and that's why I included them here. Nonprofit stewardship, I think this is not a great pathway for individual businesses to access land, but it is a way that people are getting in land, and that is nonprofits holding land either through ownership or a lease and using it as a way for community members to learn about ag and develop a relationship to the land. So it can be a really great educational and community building tool, even if it's not getting to land access for the business. And then the last one I wanted to cover is land returns and reparations. And again, I don't think this is a great tool for your average farmer who wants to get into farming and is trying to access land, but it comes up a lot in these conversations. Land returns and reparations are a way to try to address and repair historic land theft and discrimination. But they're difficult for an individual land-seeking individual or group to actualize on their own because it's about transferring assets from the people who have them to the people who don't. But definitely something that I think we need to be talking about as a community in terms of how do we help to facilitate. I think there are some really great ways to parse through these options and what might be best for you. I'm not going to talk through all of these right now because I'm running out of time, but I will make the slide. I'm happy to make the slides available so that folks can work through this material at their own pace. This is a kind of another way to compare. There's a lot here to digest. The last thing I just want to cover is some kind of common, if not completely universal themes about all of these strategies. First of all, few of these are being employed at the scale that's needed to meet demand. That's the first thing. Many of these strategies may be unfamiliar to service providers, technical experts, and lenders. So that's something we have to work on, is really building up literacy around these models. I think there can be a lack of transparency, opportunities not being publicly posted or really requiring farmers to take initiative. And we need to be thinking about how do we shift the burden off of the farmers onto the rest of the community to make these models more accessible. Long time horizons and slow moving processes. I think these are the hallmarks of creative process in many ways, but it can really be a barrier. A lot of these models also come with strings attached, and I think that's a tricky piece we have to navigate and help farmers identify what strings can they live with. But the last bullet I have here is the potential to be leveraged for systems change, and I think that's the most important. That I think there really is a lot of potential here to do good if we look at these models and how they can be extrapolated or grown. I'm going to stop there. And this is my contact information. Really excited to hear what other folks have to say, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Addie. And we will have an opportunity, maybe we can take a peek back at those charts after we hear from our panelists. We'll check in about time. Okay, wow. What a way to set the stage for the rest of our conversation today. Thank you so much. Next up on our panel, we are going to hear from Charlie Behnke. And so Charlie is an agriculture coordinator and field steward for the San Juan County Land Bank, working to steward conserved farmlands and connect farmers and ranchers to those lands. When not wearing his land bank hat, oh, sorry, we lost my slide here. Here we go. When not wearing his land bank hat, Charlie prefers to be with his family and dog, pecking away at homestead projects and occasionally retreating to the sea. He looks forward to the return of island potlucks, where we can once again share together, or come together to share and celebrate the bounty of this place. So with that, take it away, Charlie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thumbs up if everything's looking okay. Can you see my screen? Okay, here we go. I'm going to try and be quick also. 5 plus or minus minutes and blast through. Once again, Charlie Behnke, agriculture coordinator with the land bank here. Let's see, next slide. It's not working.
Try clicking your mouse. Did you do that already? As opposed to the...
There we go. So those that are not familiar with the land bank, we are a county entity that was voted in to existence in 1990 by the residents of San Juan County to receive a 1% excise tax. And that's our general funding support. So we get 1% of sales in real estate, generally by the buyer. Our mandate is very broad, is to preserve in perpetuity areas in the county that have environmental, agricultural, aesthetic, cultural, scientific, historic, scenic, and low intensity recreational value, and to protect existing and future sources of potable water. Certainly a lot of overlap between those values. And we do function more as a land trust in that we have this conservation task. And next slide. So we use conservation easements, acquisitions, ownership, and then hybrid of the two sometimes, where we can put an easement in place and protect find a suitable buyer for that property. In regards to farmland, most of the time we're using conservation easements is the primary tool. So that's, in that case, the landowner is holding the ownership of the property, and we're usually reducing development potential and protecting core values. Purchasing and acquiring, sometimes donations, instances where there might be lots other values on that property, habitats and water quality, sometimes recreation or connection to other conserved farmland, other conserved lands. And then instances with broad public support, for example, Kaufelt Farm on Orcas. So here's kind of a broad list of goals we have for our farmland protections. Protecting the ag resource lands in the county, those lands that have been identified to have prime soil, open space value, and protecting the resources on those lands. And we do our best to model agricultural best management practices, work with the district, conservation district, and other partners to work towards those goals, and the farmers, of course. Working towards climate resiliency, and that's a big task, as we all know, but lots of consideration and collaboration on that front. Preserving water resources, which we all know are very rare in the county and one of the big limiting resources here. Supporting pathways towards affordable land access, so getting to the point, preserving those lands in perpetuity so we can then lease them to farmers and keep that accessible for farming into the future. Collaboration, couldn't speak to this more. It's just since I've been in this role, you know, I have a list at the end, but it's been a lot of collaboration and working towards a robust food system out here is key, and will continue to be. Land bank is a key player in land acquisition and stewardship, but it takes a county. Support for education and research. Also some great work going there with WSU and others, and generally maintaining the open space. People love the views, and providing public access where we can. I think I'm lagging behind, so I'm going to keep it rolling. But here's some general numbers. Easements, we hold about 1,300 acres in the county across about 20 farms. And breaking that down, that's about 10% of the ag resource land in the county. Ownership, we hold about 727 acres about in the county of ag resource land, and about 2/3 of that is currently leased. So that's nearly 5% of the ag resource land. And if you look at the map, orange being ownership, green conservation easements. Bulk of the ownership is on San Juan, some on Orcas, otherwise mostly easements on Lopez. The farmland that we do own tends to be larger parcels, highly visible, with a history of dryland farming, so haying, grazing, occasionally grain, legume production. Comes to us generally poor condition, minimal infrastructure that's on its way out, fencing, and sometimes some kind of water system for stock water. And we do our best to make improvements and to improve management and usability. And at this point, mostly that's mostly been around the existing uses. There is certainly potential for more diverse production, but with water limitations and infrastructure, it's hard to get there. But we're open and willing to do the work to what we can to make it more diverse. Opportunities and challenges. Opportunities, a bit of repetition here with early goals, but really supporting the local food system, protecting the land, affordability, modeling practices, working with the voluntary stewardship program, which if we can be a model of that program and making it work with these critical area wetlands and how to keep agriculture going, we wanna fill that role. Challenges, plenty of those. Infrastructure, maintenance, development, housing, beyond agricultural crisis in the county. Housing, and many of our lands don't have their soil management. Let me know if I have a poor internet connection. Let me know if I'm breaking up. Our broad mandate, balancing our capacity here at the land bank. So leasing, our goals, again, some repetition here, but we do lease our farmland and are always striving to do a better job of it, supporting local food production. Long-term leases are priorities. We can't always do that, but it's a win-win if we can find a good lessee for the long term. Trying to incentivize education and environmental benefits, community benefits, and yeah, we're very open to diverse farming proposals and making sure the land's managed well. Again, most of the leasing opportunities are on San Juan and Orcas. That could change into the future. Let us know if you're looking, be in touch. If something's not available now, it may become available. So it's always great to have a knowledge of who's looking for what. When we do lease, we put out a request for proposals, and that's can be a long, slow process, but if you're willing to take the time, it can lead to a great relationship. And on that note, this just went out in the last week, and it's a Kaufelt farmland is kind of the exception to the rest of our properties. It's 150 acres of leased farmland. It has farmhouse, extensive infrastructure. It's been primarily a livestock-based operation with a small market garden and has a long farm history. So if you go to this link, you'll have more reading material than you ever wanted. Plenty of details there, and it's a very special farm. So if you know of someone or yourself are looking for a big project, yeah, it's quite the opportunity. And last, just want to acknowledge all the collaborations. Here's a list of the local agencies and organizations we've been working with. I'm sorry if I missed you, and awesome. A few of you are here in the room. So with that, and yeah, I should have added AFT, American Farmland Trust, and Washington Farmland Trust, and regionally there's so much work going on. So thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Charlie. And yeah, really appreciating all the panelists distilling down such an amazing amount of information to just a few moments here. So gratitude. Okay, so next up on our panel, we have Sandy Bishop. And so Sandy serves as the executive director of the Lopez Community Land Trust. She has great admiration for humans who are civic minded, loves the process of making land available in perpetuity to strengthen community, and celebrates the power of intentional focus in bringing forth a more just world for all living creatures. So with that, Sandy, you have the mic. You gotta unmute. Not there yet. Let's see if I might be able to do it on this end.
Got it.
Go, brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to take this out again and do this. Hey, everybody. So I'm Sandy Bishop with Lopez Community Land Trust. And we've been operating on Lopez Island since 1989. We have a lot of our focus has been on permanently affordable housing. And we also have part of our founding purpose, which is affordable access to land for one of many things, but is sustainable agriculture. And we are one of 250 active CLTs in the United States. And I think you saw in the beginning, there was a reference to the new communities, which was the first CLT in Georgia. So on Lopez Island in 2016, we formed what we call the Lopez Island Farm Trust, which is a program that is operated by the Lopez Community Land Trust. And we have, several goals, but a couple of them are to develop a comprehensive legal, ethical, and economically viable land lease system. And again, we really work to provide access to land and infrastructure for new farmers. We've got 2 farms right now that we own on Lopez Island. And again, our operating sphere is the island of Lopez. We're the IRS, pretty much keeps us just to Lopez. That's what we're formed for. And one of the things we do is remove land from the speculative market. So after purchase, we remove it, we hold it in trust. This is a photograph of Stonecrest Farm, which is 48 acres. Then we just purchased Lopez Sound Farm. This was a pandemic purchase. And in large part, this came about because Henning and Elizabeth, who have S&S homestead right across the street from this farm, found out that it was going to be for sale. It was 118 acres, and we sold 75 acres to the land bank, which was primarily forest land. And then we kept 42 acres of farm and forest. So Stonecrest Farm has an overlay of a conservation easement that is held by the land bank. And Stonecrest Farm was a functional, fully developed farm when we purchased it. So it's got, a farmhouse, a bunkhouse. We, put a lot of money into creating a commercial kitchen. It's got a barn. And we put out an RFP, so a request for proposals. And we got a lot of interest in the beginning, but people were slightly intimidated by it being 48 acres and not quite knowing what to do on it. And anyway, Mike and Micah finally applied. We talked with them and they wanted a 15-year lease. We were offering a 99-year, but they wanted it shorter. And it also came with, old equipment, tools, machinery, and that type of stuff, which now the farmers own. So that's Stonecrest Farm and Grazier's 48 acres. As I mentioned earlier, we purchased some land across from S&S Homestead, which we call Lopez Sound Road Farm and Forest Preserve. And we again put out a request for proposals, got some really good interest, and ended up choosing Lena and Andrew. And they have put together a farm plan, which you see the map of right there. And again, we are owning the land as the land trust. We separate that land from the improvements. And one thing I want to say is that we have been, as a land trust, doing long-term 99-year leases for about 32 years. And so we feel quite comfortable in that arena. But one thing I want to say is that when leasing farmland, I think it's very important that you realize that each farm and each farmer is unique. The circumstances are unique, and you just have to be prepared to spend some time doing that. And don't be afraid of spending time, because it's a good way to get to know each other. So we are right now in the process of negotiating a 99-year ground lease, and we have been working with the Equity Trust, which is an organization that primarily works in the Northeast, but we have found them to be very helpful in doing this, and worked initially with the Agrarian Trust and Severin and Schumacher Institute, trying to understand a little bit more about ground leases that were 99 years for farmland, because we weren't as familiar with that. So again, on this farm, which is they're going to call Still Light Farm, there really are there's really no infrastructure there. And so we own the land, and then we're leasing that to the farmers, and we'll provide, the access driveway, a spring-fed well, a deep well, a drain field, and electricity. But the farmers are actually investing in the house and the farm buildings, and that is where they will gain their equity. Just want to go briefly here about some benefits. I think that in the previous speakers, you've heard some of the benefits of, trying to interrupt a system of market-based farm sales. There's an increased number of new farmers that can farm when you offer this type of land that's affordable. So you preserve and increase working farmland. You've seen heard at the beginning that we lost 3.5% of all of our productive farmland, probably to estates over the last 10 to 15 years. So this helps us to increase or preserve working farmland. And then there's relationships that are fostered, creates interdependency and accountability within a community system. And the land is really in service of the local food security and a regenerative food system. There's also a way that we are offering security, some limited equity, and legacy with a 99-year lease. A lot of the privileges of ownership are there, but without having to purchase the land. And challenges, I think we all probably are familiar with these, and this is not extensive by any means, but it's a small nonprofit purchasing land in a high-priced area. And again, managing system outside of a capitalist speculative land market, it makes for some more complex legal relationships. And what we have found when we've put out our request for proposals is that there are few farmers that are trained for larger acreage. Even though this is, less than 50 acres, it's still larger than a lot of farmers would like to take on. We'll have some questions later, but I just want to say that part of what happens for us is that we feel as though being connected with a community land trust network that is national and international helps us to be connected with a network of support, and that having a request for proposals always helps us in terms of doing more outreach and having more people being able to apply for these. So I will end it there, and I think we're passing it on to Peggy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sandy. Wonderful overview. Okay, so yes, next up is Peggy. I will share your slides in a moment. I'll share your bio first. So Peggy Bill has deep roots in the San Juan Islands. Since the mid-1970s, she has worked in various roles to protect those qualities that make our islands unique and cherished, including bald eagle protection in the 70s, serving on the Land Bank Commission in the 90s, serving as Ag Resources Committee Coordinator from 2009 to 2018, and more recently as coordinator of the San Juan Island Ag Guild Farmer to Farmer program. She believes that a thriving, resilient agricultural system is critically important to honor our legacy and ensure a viable future for our island communities. So thank you so much, Peggy, for being here. And I will share your slides. I'm gonna switch my tabs around. Peggy. All right. There you go.
Thanks so much. And I've really appreciated this presentation so far. So as they said, as Caitlin said, I am the coordinator for the Farmers to Farmland program, which is a program of the San Juan Islands Ag Guild. And are you going to shift my slides, Caitlin? So the Farmers to Farmland program was started in 2016. We received a beginning farmer rancher development grant from the USDA. First one was in 2016 to 2019, and our partners at that time were the Organic Farm School on Whidbey Island Conservation District, the Ag Guild, the Land Bank, and Northwest Ag Business Center. And then again, we just got another USDA Beginning Farmer Rancher Grant 2021, and that one will end in 2023. Our partners, our focus this time is entirely on the San Juan, in San Juan County. And our partners, and well, I'll go over the partners in just a second. But our goals are really to connect beginning farmers to available farmland for lease or sale. And with a strong focus on trying to support success. So we also link our beginning farmers to resources, whether there's funding or markets or business planning, technical assistance, mentoring, education and training. And in this grant also, we're helping experienced farmers expand their operations by connecting them to land resources. And that part is funded through private funding. Next. So our partners are the Ag Guild, WSU San Juan County Extension for training and education, the Conservation District for farmland assessment training and cost share funding, Northwest Ag Business Center for business support and development, and San Juan County Land Bank for land, and also expertise in mechanisms for protecting land. Our process is really pretty straightforward. What we've done is, especially in our earlier grant, we did a lot of outreach to try to identify and solicit beginning farmers from all over the country. So we had people from everywhere, East Coast, South, Southeast, California, and locally. We conduct interviews and help facilitate connections and connect to resources and support. But really, we're, as I think Addie was saying, every farmer and every farmland owner is unique. So the goals are unique. Their skill sets are unique. The goals and the availability of the land and what the land can hold is unique. And so it's really a process of really trying to kind of dig down into understanding how we can make compatible connections. Next. So what we learned in that first grant, and none of this I think is probably a surprise, but the lack of beginning farmer experience is a really critical barrier. So education is really important in helping support beginning farmers as they kind of launch their careers. For those of you who don't know, the definition of a beginning farmer for USDA is 10 years or less of experience. And 10 years, you can learn a lot, but farming in the San Juans, I would say, has its unique challenges and opportunities. But farming out here is not for the faint of heart. And so we really try to help people understand what it is. What's unique about what we have here in the San Juans. We have an incredible community, both of purchasers and also farmers, and so it's very supportive. But we also have some really unique challenges with the ferries and the cost of land, hardly over the top. What it's like to deal with ferries, I said that one already. limited markets, but a very strong local support. So what we came to realize that defining success in trying to help people connect to farmland wasn't just like numbers. It was like, okay, we had 25 farmers and we connected them to 25 farmland lease opportunities. It was about really helping people understand what it was they were looking for and trying to really help support a lasting success and engagement in farming in the San Juans. And so there were a number of people that I interviewed and talked with and, you know, tried to understand what they were looking for, who decided maybe they weren't going to farm in the San Juans, or they didn't have the experience that they needed. And I didn't see that as a failure. I saw that as a success, because what we didn't want to do was to encourage people to move out here and then realize they just couldn't afford it. They needed to leave. So we were really trying to help kind of have a realistic expectation of what people were stepping into. People have already talked about the high cost of farmland. I mean, it's just in the last 2 years watching it, to me, it's heartbreaking to see how expensive land has become and who can afford it. And so we've also really, in this last grant, we're also really looking to support marginalized farm populations, so including the women and Latinx communities. So we'll be focusing on that. And as always, our collaboration with our partners is really, really essential. So we have some strategies for that. Next. So our current focus, we have a mentoring program. And so what we're doing right now is kind of considering who the potential mentors are. And then as the beginning farmers come in, we'll try to match what those beginning farmers are looking for with a good mentor who can really train them and support them in their process. And we do have some money for the mentors to help them kind of take that time. We're doing outreach to develop a portfolio of farmland opportunities. And I will say, for me, having worked on it before and now working on it, still working on it, COVID really kind of put a little bit of a stall into it, a pause into the process, because one, I didn't want to invite farmers to come into San Juan County and try to connect them with farmland. And I wasn't out in the county, on the different islands. So there's a little bit of a disconnect right now in terms of what the opportunities are out there, but we will move beyond that. So we're going to continue to solicit and engage and connect beginning farmers. We've also, as another part of this, is we're establishing kind of a huddle process. So our partner organizations will come together. So say we've got a farmer coming from Iowa, and they, looks like they've got a lot of great skills. Perhaps we have a piece of farmland that we think would be a great connection for them. But the partners will come together, or even if we don't have that land yet, we can kind of have the partners come together and say, okay, look at, here's what this farmer wants to do. This is their skill set. Let's see, brainstorm what kind of support they need, what land. So we'll work more collaboratively that way to help identify solutions. And then finally, one of the things I'm really excited about, and Addie has talked about this really great summary, an overview of it all, but we have a focus group right now that we've set up to identify alternative models for shared access to farmland. And so that focus group is, there's some farmers on it, there's some different organizational representatives. Not a big group. We've only met probably 4 times now. And so we've had presentations from Viva Farms over on the mainland, which is an incubator farm, Friends of the Farms from Bainbridge Island, which is an example of publicly owned land that is managed by Friends of the Farms. And there's multiple leases, private leases on that farmland. We're going to have a presentation from Agrarian Trust and maybe a couple other ones. And the group will really kind of try to sift through that and try to really consider what are the best opportunities or what might be the best model for shared access to farmland in San Juan County. What can we kind of do? Who are our best partners? Do you think we can come up with a model that might really work for help the land bank? Because I think one of our challenges has been in working with both the Preservation Trust and the Land Bank, who together own a lot of farmland. They're not farmers and they don't want to take on the management. So how can we put together a model that might help allow access to that and not make it really difficult for them? So that's another thing that we're working on right now, and I'm pretty excited about that. Next. Great little slide about what it takes to be a farmer: grit, vision, access to capital, determination, business planning. So some of this, you know, in our grant and in our group of partners, we will help people, like business planning. Northwest Ag Business Center can help people with that. Access to capital. We have a whole list of resources where people can go to try to access money. Farming skills and technical, you know, how do you look at a piece of farmland? The conservation district is really helpful that way, on and on. So we're trying to look at all the different aspects of it and help beginning farmers get launched on land in San Juan County. We need them. And I think that might be my last one. Yeah, so if you have any questions, go to the Ag Guild site. If you're a farmland owner, there's an application in there. If you have farmland that you would like to add to the list, if you're a beginning farmer or know a beginning farmer, there's an application in there for beginning farmers to fill out. So thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Peggy. Yeah, looking forward to hearing more about that focus group for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So last but not least, we have Patrick Bennett. And so Patrick Bennett has benefited from Opal Community Land Trust's steadfast dedication to affordable housing since 1993. He pays forward his gratitude by devoting his efforts to bring Orcas Community Participatory Agriculture, OCPA, to fruition with the hope that future generations will have access to land on which to grow their food. So thank you, Patrick, for being here on this panel. And I am juggling many slides here. Let me pull up Patrick's presentation.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. And while you're pulling that up, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the San Juan County ag community and all the various agencies that are in San Juan County for paving the way and doing a lot of the legwork to really bring an awareness to the importance of a local food system, and the quality of food we raise here is very important to the lifestyle that a lot of us have. So I just wanted to tip my hat to all those people that are involved in this whole process. It's exciting to hear what other people are doing, and I think our program will kind of tie into it in lots of different ways. And one of the ways is I hope farmers in general will consider if there's any our program can benefit people who are farming by having we have a pretty good participant base, and there might be a way that we could bring some of our participants to your site and help with like big harvest days or big gleaning, or just a way to interact and expose people who are part of our program to your farm, and hopefully be able to give your farm an extra hand to get through some of these heavier lifts that come up with farming sometimes. I just wanted to take a moment to address some of the ways that OCPA helps people access land. There's a lot of barriers, as has been stated previous to me speaking. Land prices, you know, a lot of people are just renting property, so they live on a place that the land is not suitable to grow anything. So OCPA, we have arrangements with some various land hosts, and we're allowed to grow gardens and farm on their property. And that gives a lot of people access to land who wouldn't normally be able to have access to land. And we also we have access to some really prime ag land, fenced and ready to roll. One of the other barriers that I think a lot of people have is they just lack experience. They don't really know where to start when it comes to growing a garden. They have no idea what it takes. So we have in our group, we have a nice handful of people who are experienced farmers with good solid backgrounds in gardening, as well as people who have never gardened at all. So it's a wide spectrum of people that join our program. And so we are selecting and having more experienced gardeners and farmers coming into leadership roles, which is very helpful for our organization. Let me see. So I was just going to read this. Orcas Community Participatory Agriculture, OCPA, is a locally based model of agriculture, education, and food distribution. The purpose of the CPA model is to empower people to be the creators of the food that nourishes them in solidarity with the food sovereignty movement. Most importantly, the CPA model focuses on building community. Members are actively working, learning, reskilling, and reaping rewards as a group. So when we grow a garden together, we all plan the garden and we all grow it. We grow the crops together as a group, and then it's different than a pea patch in that way. And it's also OCPA, the community participatory model, is different than a CSA in that our program is really, it's educational, it's hands-on, it's just really an experiential, engaging program for the gardeners to be part of. There's three main roles in our organization. And now this year, there's actually going to be a fourth, but it's the land host, or the people who have the venue. They have the farm-related infrastructure. They provide all the capital improvements, which stay with the land. And it kind of parallels some of the structure that the Lopez Farm Trust, it sounds like they kind of parallel each other in a lot of those ways. We've been really super fortunate to have land hosts who are not only generous, but they're altruistic, and they see the potential in our program. So we have super enthusiastic land hosts that are very supportive, which has been amazing how many of them have stepped forward this year. And I think one of the benefits they have of having our program, how about the next slide, Caitlin? One of the benefits of having us, of hosting a program of ours on their land, is that we could turn it from barren farmland, which is a lot of times it'll just be a kind of an overgrown hayfield, and we'll turn it into this garden, and we could help them realize the vision they have for their land, the plans they have for their land. And then we can also help them kind of create a legacy that they're proud of by helping the community become resilient and self-reliant. That's, people are really into that. So how about the next slide, Caitlin? So this is some of the infrastructure that stays on the land that the land host help with. The greenhouse on the left is just one that was a commercial greenhouse, and the one on the right was one that was made of lumber from one of the land hosts, milled up all the lumber, and we just tried to, we were trying to find a local way to use less plastic, and that's what we came up with. And it was really, it's really a beautiful process, and it was a steep learning curve, but we're innovative and persistent, and we figured it out. We're trying to figure out how to do local visqueen, but if anybody has ideas on that, we'd really appreciate help on that one. Bending hoops we can do, but the visqueen is the hard part. The participants, I think one of the big values to the participants is they learn the entire process from seed to table to seed. And I think it's a miracle that farmers appreciate because they've lived that life. But it's not that common amongst people today. It's the getting people to come together and get their hands in the dirt. It's like we need that tactile experience, that connection with the earth, because we're so cyber-centric these days. It's just good for people to get some garden therapy and get out of that realm for a while and do something really tangible, and they get to eat the results, which are very tasty. And only after they experience that whole process can people really fully comprehend what it takes to take that seed and make it edible and to turn it into food. It's an amazing process, and it's very complicated. This is an example of our weekly sign up for work shifts. We also have one for our harvest shifts. And this has really helped us a lot, know who's coming when. It's given a little bit of structure. And that way the site managers, they kind of have an idea of who to expect, and they know a little bit what's going on. It used to be pretty unpredictable, but now we also have a Google Doc for the harvesting, and we have some people come earlier and lead the harvest, and they talk with the site manager and kind of get an idea, an overview of what's ripe and how much of each crop we can harvest. And then the harvest crew comes a little bit later. We focus a lot on long storage staple crops, which aren't really that high value at the marketplace, but they're food that if you're going to be serious about feeding yourself, you need to have those long storage staple foods. And then we're trying to focus a lot of energy on those because they also take a lot of space. So we can share growing these big field crops and divvy them out, and they have good shelf life. So that makes it easy. How about the next slide, Caitlin? But we also grow a lot of market garden type produce, which has a higher value, which is more perishable, shorter shelf life, and it's more complicated to grow. So how about the next slide too? And this is another example of what's not to like about fresh strawberries. They're just totally amazing. And that when people have the fresh strawberries out of the garden, that wins them over right there. How about the next slide? This is our ultimate goal, is to have our yield to be just an abundant community of people who understand how to grow food. They're familiar with it at the very least. And we're having different feedback from some of our past members who are saying things like, I just built a house and I'm ready to planting this. I can take on doing this garden in my house now because of what they've learned. So we are helping people get over that barrier of not feeling competent to be able to do this. And this is Caitlin. She's like our moderator right there. So she knows she can help me fill in some of these blanks, but we've been doing this for, this is our 9th season. And the anchor farmers, what our role is, we're like the liaisons between the land host and OCPA, the organization of all the members and the site managers and stuff. We link up the land host with all the different participants, and we ensure the needs of the participants are met and everything's working good. We also help organize workshops. We set up systems which are going to be templates that we can use on all these different gardens and different sites. We're going to emphasize a lot of work this year on setting up different systems. We do bulk purchasing for the group too. we, as you can see here, our first project was Kai Dog Farm in the upper left in 2014. And we're evolving from a community garden in 2014 to a community grown food network in 2022. Last year in the upper right, Fur Peace Farm was our second site. We started it in June, and we broke ground in June, and we put a bunch of our kind of extra starts in the ground, put a fence around it, all in the period of one day, basically, and then followed up, and we got considerable harvest, which was very encouraging, how fast we could go from a hayfield to a productive garden. So that's kind of our program in a nutshell. I guess I think that's about all I really have to say about it. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to share our program with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick.
My pleasure.
Great summary. Okay. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. Fantastic job. So now we have about 15 minutes here for some questions. So let me catch up real quick because I was sharing slides. I know there's a couple kind of practical ones. There was one for Charlie about the other parcel on Orcas. Oh, excuse me, besides Caufelt Farm.
Yep, got it. So yeah, below Caufelt or above, depending how you're looking at it, is Fowler's Pond Preserve, which is primarily water. And you drive by it every day if you're on Orcas. It's currently leased to the Lums for grazing sheep seasonally. I think there's about 12 acres, if I remember right, that's grazable. There's also a big chunk of forest. So it's a limited use one, but great to have the sheep out there instead of mowing it. And it's tricky terrain, steep, hilly, wet at the bottom.
Excellent. Okay, so I kind of got oriented here. Sandy was providing some really great information in the chat if you want to check out some responses there. Thank you, Sandy. Addie does have to sign off right at 3 o'clock. So with that in mind, I'm curious, we can do a little straw poll here. We can hear the panelists ask each other some questions and see like what was sparked in your mind. We can check out the slides that Addie had with those kind of like how to parse out your options. And we can also, because it seems that we've addressed the questions in the chat, we can just have folks raise their hand and ask live time here. So any of the speakers, what do you have a preference? And we'll go till 3. Addie has to sign off and we can stay a couple minutes after too if folks would like. No strong preferences. Okay. One main question, there's so many ideas. Folks really want to see your slides. Can we just get a thumbs up from the speakers who would be willing to share their slides after? Okay, I see Addie, I see Charlie, Patrick, Peggy, and Sandy, yeah? Okay, great. Okay, yeah, we will make those available. Those can be sent out. Yeah, it's a lot of content here we've covered. Okay, here is a question. Which alternative models to farmland access are most utilized? Is there a panelist who wants to have a go at that?
I'll just.
Oh, you went back on mute for a sec. There you go. Oh, you got it. It went back on for some reason.
There we go.
I know.
Okay.
Good.
You know, what I'm seeing in the San Juan Islands is really the basic. Farmers leasing from farmland owners. We don't have long-term leases necessarily because that's really difficult to do. So I don't think we have the models that I'd like to see. So, but it's what I see happening most often is people putting a lot of effort and love and energy into a piece of property that they don't necessarily have long-term access to and or necessarily the support to make it work. So that's why I'm looking for alternative models.
I see some folks signing off. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, another question we have. Has anyone ever been able to slightly bend zoning limitations? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
You know, again, I'll speak to this, but certainly jump in others. But the issue of housing is such a big one, and it's tricky how to bend the rules for that. But I would love to see ways we can do that. I know of farms that have figured out, not necessarily solutions that the county would definitely stand behind, but I think they're great models. And I'd love to see some changes to the comp plan and the zoning, but that's a really hard path. But I'd love to see that because there are some good examples.
Bert, does that answer your question? You can say in the chat or give a little thumbs up with your icon.
I can add some to that.
Go for it.
The Ag Resources Committee has been thoroughly involved in the updating of the comprehensive plan in the last couple of years, and many of the elements kind of work towards that as far as not bending the rules, but hopefully making more accommodations for farm worker housing and potential tiny home type options. And I think it's all still in process, but there's certainly a lot of effort and consideration there.
I want to say a couple of things too. So, you know, land use in a community, well, all rights, everything around land is in a bundle. And the community holds some of those rights and then the individuals hold others. So I think if you want to start parsing out rights and saying this particular land can be released from some of these community held rules, then there has to be some exchange. And right now, San Juan County, in terms of housing, has said, if you're willing to do a 99-year permanently affordable housing, you can do some what they call rural cluster housing, because you are saying, yes, we are adding to density, but we are doing it so that it will be a long-term value for the community. And I think we have to enter that into the conversation, because a lot of times we just talk about land use and somebody may get a lot of benefit and 2 years later sell the whole thing. And we know how property here rises. And I think, you know, community land trusts, the land bank, preservation trust, any of those work really well because they are basically taking land, removing it from speculative market, and then having an overlay of a lease or an easement or something. And it allows people to be there. Somebody asked us question here, how decisions around long-term land changes work. And in our leases, we are basically defining things like, what does it mean to be a regenerative farmer? What does it mean, you know, these terms organic or sustainable and all of that. And then you have to, as the landowner, you have to back away and allow people to farm and, you know, create their farm within the confines that you've agreed to, such as principles of, you know, regenerative land use principles, things like that. So you're anchoring it, but not specifying exactly what they have to do. But my whole point is that removing land from speculation, not just further dividing the land up into smaller and smaller pieces, I think will ultimately serve our community better and getting farmers onto the land so that we can have a more secure food security system here.
Excellent. Thank you.
Caitlin, can I hop in? Because I have to go
Yeah.
in just a couple minutes. I saw that Josh asked a question about what alternative models the speakers think have the greatest potential for larger scale systems change. And I love this question. And what immediately came to mind for me, at the beginning of my slides, I talked about the 3 creativity levers. It's about who owns or leases out the land, who buys or leases the land, and then what are the terms of that lease or sale. For me, the greatest systems change happens when we play with all of those levers, and we take those those 10 models that I laid out, and we start to combine them together. So we think about how can we combine a land trust easement process with non-familial succession to help make land more affordable to pass it on to the next family. How do we combine nonprofit stewardship with municipal leasing, like Bainbridge Island is doing with Friends of the Farms down there? It's about, to me, that change comes from when we take these tools and we layer them one on top of the other, and we get as creative as we possibly can within all of the constraints.
Excellent. I'm glad you saw that. That was my wait, before you go, can you touch on that? Thank you, Addie, and thank you so much for being here. Whenever you need to sign off, yeah, just so much gratitude for you presenting today. So any other speakers, would you like to respond to that question? What alternative models do speakers think have the greatest potential for larger scale systems change? There are also some more specific questions too.
Well, I've benefited by being an Opal resident for a long time, and to me, the land, what appealed to me about a land trust was way early on in my life, I realized, how can we really own the land? We can't really own the land. So having a land trust where the land trust owns the land and we have a 99-year renewable lease, that was very appealing to me. And I'm super impressed with Lopez Community Land Trust for doing Farmland Trust, and hats off to you and thank you for that, Sandy.
That's a good segue. There's a specific question for you, Sandy. Oh, and maybe you touched on this actually, the decisions around long-term land changes. Yeah, you touched on that. Thank you. Okay, I'm skimming through here. We got some resources in the chat if you all want to check that out. Okay, did I miss anyone's question from the chat? Okay.
I guess to touch on the models question some more, if we're
go for it.
As Peggy described, that's really a big focus in the beginner farmer rancher development grant subgroup, looking at models. So there's a lot of focus on that, and there has been for years, of how to take all of these players and make the most robust food system we can. From my perspective, the land bank's role of holding agricultural lands, and we have the capacity and ability to acquire and hold and preserve those lands and steward them, and managing them as we have been, finding lessees, people that can manage the larger parcels, is we can handle that, but to go beyond that into these more complex operations is a challenge. So there's so many examples. The Friends group on Bainbridge is one that kind of stood out of late, with a lot of comparable situation as far as land values and soils and water limitations and housing crisis and all those things. how to, yeah, it could be an entity, a new entity, or an existing one to take on kind of that focus and work on connecting all those dots. But it's a lot of work, and somebody's got to do it. So we're functioning now at some level, but there's room for growth.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie. Okay. Any other panelists to speak on that? Or any folks from the audience, if you want to come off of mute and ask aloud, go for it. Getting a lot of thank yous. Speakers getting some love over there in the chat. Okay. Well, we can stay on for a couple minutes. Questions? Yeah, okay. I see Henning's hand. Go for it, Henning.
I was particularly interested in what Patrick Bennett had to say about involving local folks from his community in teaching them how to grow their own food and feed themselves. And so these are really not professional farmers. They're not people who are farming for profit. They're learning how to grow food and share that food with others. To me, that's a very worthwhile goal. And that's related to another goal that I've always held, which is for the whole community to feed itself. And I've noticed that a number of efforts of bringing new farmers to the land have really gone outside of our county to recruit those farmers. And I've always been wondering, where are the succession farmers from our own communities? And what are we doing to attract young farmers to take over these lands and grow food for the community? And I can see that what Patrick is doing and what I just named here sort of goes hand in hand. I'm really interested in a local food system where local people eat food that is grown within the community by people who want to do the work, whether they are gardeners, neighbors, or professional farmers. But I'm looking for more ways of bringing the people of the islands themselves into the process of growing that food and distributing it and processing it for their own consumption. So I didn't hear much about anybody addressing that issue. I think the focus is really on the difficulty of finding farmland and how to afford it and how to help young farmers learn the trade. But I want to talk more about how do we build a farming community within the community itself and recruit the farmers from the community. How can we do that?
Thank you, Henning. And yeah, we technically are ending at 3. Anyone who needs to sign off, please do. Panelists included. Gratitude for being here. Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, and we'll stay a couple extra minutes here. I'm getting a tea delivery. I see Peggy. Are you gonna take that question?
Yeah, Henning, I appreciate that comment and that question, and I agree, it's really important. I've been seeing some really, really wonderful examples of young farmers coming forth from within our island communities. On Lopez, on San Juan, I don't know so much, well, actually on Orcas too. And what I've seen is that the mentoring, informal mentoring, people kind of saying, okay, here's this great young farmer who wants to really learn and get set up, and people kind of stepping up and helping them by helping share, resources and train them and all of that. And I think that's been a really, really important piece of it. And I'm quite excited about some of these young folks stepping in. So I think there is progress happening that way. And I'm sure there's more we can do, but it's really exciting. 4-H could be a way we can also reach in and find people that way too. But I think there's progress that way.
Well, that's great to hear. I just hope we can be part of this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a
on
good
that succession.
I had a question. It's a really good point, Henning, and I know we've discussed that a lot in the transition group meetings.
Right.
But I had a question for Caitlin and Patrick, which is, what are the limitations to the expansion of your model? Is it the anchor farmers like yourself, the people with experience and the willingness to mentor?
You want to take that, PB? Wait, you're still on mute. These mute buttons are being pesky. There you go.
Well, I think there's plenty of people out there with enough skill and experience to guide people through the process, to at least give them confidence to keep trying, because I just keep trying. I make so many failures, but I just keep trying, and I don't get too attached to the results like that didn't work. Well, let's try something else. I think we're really working on funding, because one of the bottlenecks for us has been this is our 9th year and we haven't really gotten any kind of compensation. So having some kind of compensation will be able to keep people with skills with their boots on the ground and being able to lead programs like this. I think it's really asking a lot of the local farmers to provide for the county residents and the island residents. If we have a problem with a supply chain, or who knows, whatever wild cards come out, we have a half a dozen farmers, or well, we have a very small handful of the population that is growing food, and a lot of burden falls on their shoulders. And I think we're just trying to get as many people skilled up to grow food, and the experience is wonderful too.
And I'll add on to that. I think that one limiting factor that we've seen amazing shifts in is in our own minds, thinking that we're not capable. And so one of my favorite experiences of all these 9 years, I was standing there with 2 of the participants, and we were talking about woolly caterpillars and how the segments, the length of the different segments, can indicate, will it be a tough winter or different things about the seasons. And so one of the participants said, yeah, I guess you farmers need to know about things like that. And then he paused and he was like, I guess us farmers need to know about that. And I was just like, yes, that made it all worth it. And it is about remembering things that we inherently know. I just think that there's no way our species would be here if we didn't, in our bones and our DNA, know how to work with plants and animals and have that reciprocal relationship. So, we have these self-limiting beliefs in our own minds, and how can we help each other release those, and be teaming up and practicing cooperation. And there's so many benefits to growing food together.
Right on.
Sarah, I see Sarah responding. You're on mute. Do you want to add something?
Yes, no, I was just going to say it's a great model, I think, and really worthy of replication. And we have, on San Juan Island, we have the growers circle that Roger leads every week, but it's not quite the same as going out and farming together. We're all doing our own individual stuff in our own backyards.
Hey, thanks for the pitch, Sarah.
Well, Roger, this is our next step, right? We're going to get out there together and farm.
Actually, there is a little bit of talk within the San Juan Island Grange of connecting grangers who have land with grangers who want access. And so it would be an in-house model based pretty much on Patrick's model over on Orcas. So I'm going to be wanting to talk with him.
Great.
And Caitlin.
And Caitlin.
We're co-conspirators.
All right. Well, I'm going to thank you so much. I'm going to take a break before Roger's session.
Thank you. Yeah, anybody who needs to sign off, go right ahead. Thank you all.
I just wanted to say one more thing is that, growing food as a community is as old as the hills. I mean, it's been it goes back as far as anything in human history. And yet we're trying to do it in a modern context. So it's a bit challenging. We're trying to remember skills that we possessed 100 years ago that were just commonplace. So we're starting over in a way.
Yeah.
But it's all there, and we can do it.
Very exciting. Okay, bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. All right, we got folks signing off. Thank you, all the panelists.